Hey, MBA hopefuls, and welcome to MBA Waves. You are on the air. Today, we are joined by my usual co-hosts, Bara Sapir and Krithika Srinivasan. Hello, how are you?
Hello, hello. Good to see everyone.
Hey, doing amazing. Thanks.
Thanks, guys. And today's episode 87 of MBA Waves, is all about MBAs in Europe versus the USA, a really hot topic. And we have joining us from North Carolina, Danielle Richie, my friend and colleague from Kenena-Flagler Business School at UNC. Hey, D. How you doing, Danielle?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm excited for today's topic. So, look, we all know the MBA was born in the United States at the beginning of the 20th century, and there was a sort of precursor to the MBA that appeared at Harvard, but under a different name. And then Wharton, the #1 ranked school right now at the moment, took the idea and tweaked it a bit and released the first official MBA program. And following this, there was a slow spread around the US, and Canada was not to be left out, of course, with University of Western Ontario had their Ivy Business School open the first MBA outside of the US, just a couple hours out of Toronto. And then after World War II, it started spreading all over the world, particularly in Europe first. And the first school in Europe was INSEAD. You probably have all heard of them, one of the very highly ranked MBA programs as well. And these days, it's really been spreading around most of the major business hubs in Asia. And if you look at the FT rankings, the Financial Times, you can roughly estimate about 50 of the top 100 are in North America, so US and Canada, about 30 in Europe, and about 20 in Asia, including like all of Asia, India, and so on. So, things are changing, the sands are shifting, and we're here to talk about it today with a specific focus on the USA versus Europe. So that said, I want to let Krithika take it away.
Thanks, Eric. So today we have Danielle Richie from UNC Kenena-Flagler. Danielle, welcome again. You're the Director of Admissions and Recruitment for the MBA program. So we're very happy to hear you to represent the US side of things. And Eric, in your past role, you have been admissions on the admissions recruitment side for a very top European program. So you're going to represent Europe today. So when you are thinking about an MBA in Europe or the US, what comes to mind first? So Danielle, you may go first.
Yeah. And again, thank you all so much for having me here today. I'm excited to talk about this. And it is a common question, especially when we are traveling internationally, is where should I go? Should I go to Europe? Should I go to the US? Should I stay in my home country? So this is a really good topic and something that candidates should be thinking about. I've recruited in the US for full-time MBA programs now for over a decade. So kind of dating myself on this, but I think that
started very young, of course.
I know. Oh, yes, I started when I was 2. I knew I wanted to be an MBA recruiter. But when I talk to candidates, especially when I'm traveling internationally, the question is, how long is the degree? And will I get a job post MBA? What is that recruiting process like for an international student studying in the US and that wants to stay in the US? So there's a lot of different things that we are talking about when it comes to getting your MBA. Another important thing that candidates will ask about too is tuition, because the currency conversion of their home country could be very different when it's converted into US dollar. So those are two of the biggest things that we get asked quite often about in the US, and something that comes top of mind, I think, for candidates as well when they are recruiting.
Yeah, so from oh, go ahead, Krithika. I think it cut you off.
I was just going to say, sorry. What would you say, something that's the #1 priority for MBA programs in Europe?
#1 priority. Well, I think this goes to really anywhere. It's finding the right fit, right? I mean, a lot of people are looking at rankings early on. And I always say, rankings, I think, are a great place to start and a terrible place to finish. Because, once you go deeper into the research, you're going to learn so much more about the program that the ranking doesn't really tell you. So finding the right fit is important for everyone. Also, people look a lot for scholarships, which is normal. And it's a real factor. Like, can you afford this program? So, there's the sticker price, right? The full price that's listed on the website, but there's a number of scholarships. The thing I like to tell my clients, though, is you better not count on scholarships unless it's explicitly said on that school's website that if you have, say, this GMAT score, you automatically get this scholarship, or if you apply by this deadline, you automatically get this scholarship. These kind of scholarships do exist, but most of them are not guaranteed, and you don't want to hedge your bets on that you're going to get that. You have to look at it a little bit as like a bonus, I would say. But the reality is most people end up taking loans. At least some part of the tuition is covered by loans. And of course, it's not only the tuition that you're paying for, right? It's a year or 2 years of living in that place where the cost of living can vary immensely. You know, if we're talking about the US, I mean, like places like San Francisco and New York are incredibly expensive, whereas other places maybe were like in North Carolina are a little bit cheaper. And here in Europe, you know, cities like Paris, London, Zurich, you know, Copenhagen, even Barcelona and Madrid are quite expensive, whereas other places you might have more affordable living expenses, which would impact the total amount that you probably need to budget for and perhaps borrow for. Yeah.
I think too, Eric, I mean, you bring up a lot of good points about living and other things within the MBA programs that you want to budget for. But another is like experiences within the MBA that you may not think about, like case competitions that you would have to travel to. Maybe you're going to go on career tracks, or maybe you want to do a global immersion. Those are additional costs that you may not anticipate in the beginning. So it's important, regardless of where you go, that you look at what opportunities and resources are available to you that might cost additional money outside of the tuition, books, and everyday living.
Yeah, I definitely saw that when I was working at ESSEC Business School. So I was on the recruitment side. I was director of recruitment, but on the admissions side, they were very careful to, you know, ask people during the interview, like, what is your budget? Like, how do you intend to pay for this? And it's not to be prying, but to make sure they weren't setting people up for failure. They didn't want to welcome somebody into a foreign country. They've put every penny into this, and they didn't factor in some things, as you said, like those case study competitions, or even just company visits or networking events. I remember I read an article maybe 6 months ago. I won't say which school, but it's one of the top in one of the more expensive areas of the world. And, you know, they were factoring in all the different kind of events, like also like getting dressed to the nines for these events at some expensive places where it might be $25 for a cocktail. You never know. And they were saying, like, you're looking at upwards of nearly $500,000 for when you factor in everything, that's exceptional. Oh, looks like we lost Krithika, but I'm sure she'll be right back. But the point is that there are expenses that you probably haven't thought about. And that's also one of the reasons I always talk to alumni and talk to current students to find out, like, you know, what are they doing really? You know, there's the brochure, there's the recruiters, which are obviously have lots of information, but, you know, I think it's really helpful to speak to current students and alumni to get that extra insight and say, like, what did it cost you? Especially if you get somebody, like, a lot of times schools have student ambassadors right on the website, and usually there's a few to choose from, and possibly you can find somebody who's from your country, somebody who can really relate to you, that you guys come from relatively the same place, and say, hey, listen, you have to think about this, because it might be a total, like, culture difference, something you never would think about because of where you come from. And that's fine, but that's why it's so important to research properly.
I'd also imagine, like, even I think it probably affects business school folks less than undergrads, but the political situation of where different schools are, right? Like right now in the United States, it's just this petri dish of crazy, right? All over the place. And like, quote me on that.
I love that.
Yeah.
And so, you know, what happens and what are the schools doing to support students with some of their choices and how they want to live? You know, you know, it's going to be very different going to a school in Texas, perhaps, than going to school in California or New York, right? So that if that's something that's important to you, or you're worried even about health choices that you might need to make, I think, like I said, I think it's a less of an issue for business school students who have more resources than undergrads and they have more life experience, but it probably is something to kind of think about. And from what I understand, you know, you have to think about that, like in Brazil, right? Like in Brazil, there's health. I don't know if there's a business school to talk about in Brazil per se. I don't know what it is, but what's the country? What are the ethos? Is there war happening in the country that you're looking at? Like, what's gun violence like, right? So these are like standard questions in anywhere that you want to live that you might want to consider.
Yeah, I mean, culture, society, and business are so much intertwined, and there's the culture of that, country. If it's a large country like the U.S., that state, and certainly that city, but also that school. Like every school has its own culture, and even they might be two schools in the same city. Speaking from experience, there's good 4 or 5 top business schools right around Paris, and they all have very different cultures from each other, besides being in the same city of France. Sorry, Krithika, I think you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, see, what people think is like Europe is a country, but it isn't. There's going to be so much of differences between a school in, say, Germany versus Spain versus the UK, of course. And I want to talk about a little bit more about, do you think Europe has more regional players as compared to the US? And should that be something that candidates should take into account?
Yes and no. I feel like the answer always is that, right? Or it depends. The US and Europe are more or less the same size geographically speaking. The US is unified by a singular language, a singular constitution, a singular borders and visas process. And yet, and I'll let Danielle continue on this, the different pockets of the country have different cultural, and Danielle's lived and worked in a few places already. And I'll, again, let Danielle go back to that. In Europe, yes, there are all, of course, different countries and very many different languages, but there's also like Schengen, right? So there is a certain unifying thing, the European Union, the Eurozone. In the business school world, in any case, we're using English almost all of the time anyway, whatever the country may be. So there are, I would say, in the end, a little bit more nuances or differences. But yeah, maybe I'll stop there and let Danielle finish on what she has to say about the States.
Yeah. And Eric, you've lived in the US. I mean, you're a New Yorker, so you get it too. Like even living in New York City, you go to a different borough and it's a completely different culture, potentially.
A different block. A different block.
Literally a block. So I lived in Boston prior to coming to Chapel Hill, and I worked for a business school. And Boston has probably one of the most populated business schools within the world. There's so many. You have Harvard, you have MIT, Babson, Bentley, BU. I mean, there's so many schools, and you go to each of them, it's a different culture. And in the US, it's kind of like Europe, where you have countries right next to each other. Each state is almost like their own country, I feel like, in terms of the culture and the atmosphere that they bring. I'm from upstate New York, originally born and raised, but it's completely different than New York City. Like there's farms where I'm from, whereas New York City, you have skyscrapers. And in North Carolina, it's the same. And so when you talk about fit, it's really important that the geographical location is a good fit for you, from cost of living to beliefs, to a type of environment that you thrive in. So maybe you get distracted easily, and a large city like New York might be detrimental to you and your success, because you're going to want to go out all the time maybe and just be distracted by all of the things, the sights, the sounds, the smells. Whereas maybe Chapel Hill, it's your quintessential college town, but it's accessible. And so you have a little bit of everything here without the 24/7 lights and distractions. So yes, recruiters would come to campus, but you can also fly out, go, vacation, or get home to your, where you want to go visit family. And so culture is a really big thing. And that's something that we pride ourselves on in the US. People, I always found it funny because in the US, each school has a mascot. And when I was traveling abroad, people were like, well, what's a mascot? And that is huge for us. That's the type of culture in the US. We're big on school spirit. At UNC, we're the Tar Heels. Our mascot is a ram named Ramses. But we're big on that Carolina pride. And we always say, welcome to the Tar Heel family. And that's our community. We call it the Carolina Way. And it's all about helping each other. Yes, we're a top 20 MBA program, but I like to say we're not sharks, we're dolphins. And that's the type of environment that they would get here at Kenena-Flagler compared to maybe somewhere else. And so it's really important, if you can visit a school, visit. If you can't, we understand that financially sometimes, or just from a time management perspective, you might not be able to. You can still get that from videos or talking to current students or alumni. And that will tell you a lot as well.
I just want to say one thing also, that schools like UNC are bringing in the biggest and the brightest like performances and speakers. So you're not losing touch with what big cities have. You just don't have as many choices, which for me, I actually don't want to have so many choices, because it's like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? But like, if I have a choice between 20 things rather than 200, it was always nicer for me to actually navigate. But you don't lose out at all when you look at schools that are more remote, because they bring in everyone on all the tours that they're going on. The music, the book tours, everything actually comes to you, which makes it super convenient. So.
Yeah, we had Jamie Dimon, who's the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, here in September. And he did a big speech and whatnot. But then he was at the pub with like our investment banker students, and and they were just had the access was there. And he came to class the next day. And so it's those types of experiences you don't have to fight for. And it's nice. And you don't have the expense either to like have to travel or live in a large city to do that. But if that's the type of place that you love and enjoy, then that's the right fit for you. You will still get those opportunities, but it's just a different environment and culture.
And you know what Danielle's been saying just now, like all that about culture, it's so true. And that said, like some of the aspects of a school's culture, like is it more competitive or more collaborative? Like she said, sharks versus dolphins. I love that metaphor. Is it like larger class size, smaller class size, kind of diversity questions, big city, small city, that kind of stuff. You can have a school or an MBA program in the States whose culture resembles very much that of a school in Europe. Because, there's going to be like your UNCs and your Harvards and your, Kellogg's in Europe as well. Like they're not necessarily like linked in any way, but they have maybe a similar culture. And in some cases, they do have partnerships. They do have exchanges with schools that do represent either similar values or offer, there's a match or there's some kind of complementarity. Schools like, for example, when I was working at ESSEC, just to reference where I was working before, they had a partnership with Central, which is one of the top engineering schools here. So it's a way for either engineers to feed into doing an MBA, or for people who wanted to do an MBA that wanted like a tech side to it. It's kind of like probably the birth of STEM happening here in Europe. But STEM MBAs. But anyways, yeah, so important. And some of the other differences, I don't know if Krithika was going to ask about this, but I thought about this while you were speaking, Danielle. Like, I think there's a lot of trends. There's tendencies, right? In general, MBAs in the US tend to be 2 years long. In general, they tend to be 1 year in Europe. There's exceptions on both sides of the pond, right? Both sides of the Atlantic. In general, because it's longer, right? They're typically more expensive. My average, like just to throw a number, there's about 50,000 USD per year per program. So I don't know if that corresponds, Danielle, for your specific case at UNC Chapel Hill. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So roughly that 50 grand for a year. So if it's a 2-year program, double it. In general, European programs tend to be smaller. I know a bunch of programs that are around 50 people. There's a couple around 100 or 300 in Europe. In the US, they tend to be bigger. Like, I don't know what UNC is. Kenena-Flagler, how many are?
We're one of the smallest of the top 20, but an incoming class could be between 250 and 280. I've worked with smaller MBA programs where it was maybe 50 MBA students. So again, it goes back to what type of environment do you want and class size. And Eric, you bring up a good point. I think we probably should touch base on it too. Is like if you study in Europe or in the US, a good thing to think about too is, do they have study abroad or student exchanges? Because maybe you want to do a semester or a mod, start off in Europe, maybe at LBS, and then you come to the US and you get that experience of both worlds. And that's something else to think about too, because we will get about 100 exchange students each semester.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, I always think that studying abroad is better. I think that if you can have the courage and to be organized and so on, to step out of your comfort zone and experience a year or two in a foreign country, whatever that may be, to pick up another language, perhaps, to just learn how to live and do business and problem solve and get along with people from a different culture. You come back to wherever you're from and you're ahead of the game. Like that is considered, you know, there's a whole bunch of skill sets involved with doing that. But also even as a student that's applying, if you're applying to a school in a different country than where you're from, you're different already. You're probably more likely going to get a diversity scholarship. They're probably a bit more interested in you, maybe a bit more lenient in some of the data points for your admissions process, because, you know, schools want to have diversity. And that is a reflection of the thousands of studies that companies have done that prove that diversity increases profits, increases, you know, job satisfaction, and just a better work environment. And so schools mirror that, the corporate world, for diversity, and the scholarships are the proof. So yeah, as an applicant, I think you have perhaps better chances getting in as an international student. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Danielle. And the possibility for more scholarship and to be like added value as sorry?
It depends.
It depends. Totally depends. But there's where, like, if you wanted to stay in your own country to do either a study abroad or an exchange, you can have the best of both worlds. Mm-hmm. You know, if it's not realistic for you to go abroad, it's not going to be because of language skills, because MBAs, any of the top 100, they're all in English. But it'll be maybe because of a family situation, a medical situation, a political situation, whatever it may be. But you want to dip your toe out for a semester, and you know, and by the way, you have the network of that school that you were studying at. So, for example, if you, I don't know if this is possible at Kenena-Flagler, but to do a semester at LBS as an exchange, just as an example, real or not, you can enter that LBS network. You're not an alum from that school, but you're definitely making connections while you're there. I mean, you should be.
Yeah, I was about to say that, you know, I think like one of the reasons why people would also want to go to Europe is because it does have better international diversity. And I think like only during the COVID years that US saw the diversity ratio increased over like 40% for the very first time, like, you know, even in the top 20 schools. And it was like in the lower 30s for quite some time. So in your experience, how does this translate for international placements and other recruiting? Is it because one perception is if you go to the US, you're most likely to get a job there, versus when you go to Europe, you know, you could always move around and even get like placements in Asia and then Middle East and, you know, other regions.
Danielle, you want to start it off?
Yeah, Barrett, you had something.
Well, I'm gonna put up Marlena's contribution to this, is that, you know, about network. It's not specifically about diversity, but it is about networking. And I love what you're saying too, Eric, where it's like, if you can have the benefit of networking in two places, right, wherever your home school is, and then wherever you're gonna go, like that just builds your Rolodex. You know, it just builds who you know and how you can move through, especially if there's a certain field, right, that's really strong, let's say in Asia and the US, or Europe, like London or Germany and the US. Like you're building those connections as you're studying. But I mean, Marlena wrote that Europeans choose a European school for a specific network. For example, St. Gallen, if I'm pronouncing it right, in Switzerland, is a powerhouse in the German-speaking world. And she also shared that she's never met a US applicant who's considering St. Gallen, which is super interesting, or a German accepted at St. Gallen who would trade that for anything but maybe 2 US schools that you can imagine, right? So it's different perspectives, because I think where you start off, you have different expectations and perceptions. But Eric, we had someone recently on one of our episodes who specifically was an American student who she might have gone to undergrad in Europe also, but she wanted to go to business school in Europe, and she was still working there. Do you remember that episode? It was in the past. It was definitely in 2023.
Yes, it was actually also a German school, WHU, and she, I don't remember where she's originally from. There was two women, and one of them is in Munich. They're both at Google. One of them's in Munich, and one of them's in San Francisco Bay Area, right?
Right.
Yeah, and you know, as like Marlena said, like being from Europe or from Germany, actually, it's such a brand that is recognized, like Harvard is, like globally, or for sure in the US, like St. Gallen is that kind of brand. And so, yeah, it's obvious to her. For the one from the States, I think she had a kind of binational family. So she was maybe a bit more privy to like outside of the US stuff. And for her, it was a great way to pivot over to Europe. But I think Danielle was going to respond to the question initially that Krithika asked.
Yeah, that's honestly a really good question. We get that from, regardless if they're international or domestic students. You know, they think that majority of candidates think, oh, if I go to school in the Southeast, that means I have to get a job in the Southeast, which is not true. Students here, they'll get a job. Yes, they go to school here, but just because you go to school here doesn't mean you spend the rest of your life here. This is only 2 years of your life out of school with your MBA program. We have students that will get a job offer where they go to San Francisco afterwards. Maybe they work, they get an offer from Deloitte and they want to go back to their home country. You don't have to recruit there. The recruiter that you're working with will know about opportunities that are available and will connect with other recruiters in different countries or locations, even in the US, and be able to connect you so that you can get opportunities there. And so again, it's not just the location where you go. Of course, it's important if you do want to do international business and you do want to do networking in another country. Doing a study abroad or going to school in that country, of course, is going to help you. And I don't see that being a disadvantage, but just because you go to a school in a certain place doesn't mean that you're there for the rest of your life. Even though if you love it, we do have people that stay, but recruiters are coming in from all over the place and not just from one region of the US or even the world, because I mean, Amazon, a global company. And sometimes their international students say they want to go back to their home country and work. They can also get placed back in the US maybe 2 or 3 years down the line if an opportunity is available. So we see that happening often, not during COVID. COVID was challenging in that, you know, consulates and embassies were closed. Candidates couldn't get their visa appointments. And with the visa process having, you know, a percentage has to be in the studying in person, it was challenging. So we did see a significant decline in international applications. But now there's a lot more international student mobility that we're seeing an increase. And with the job market, that's really important to take into consideration, because in the US, in 2020, not a good job market. COVID really impacted. And so we saw applications go up. And the job market got stronger in 2022, and we had high placement numbers. And so when you are thinking about studying abroad, is thinking about, I think Bara mentioned earlier, like the political climate, like what is going on in the world. And so looking at the type of industry or functional area that you want to go into, is understanding that in that country too is really important.
Really interesting insights, Danielle. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. There's that correlation between unemployment, job market, and MBA applications. And yeah, those that started at the coincidental time of when COVID began, you know, they had a lot of challenges, and they probably felt disenfranchised and disappointed that they couldn't have that full MBA experience. But the timing, the way it worked out in terms of placement of jobs afterwards, a lot of people, I think, had a lot of job opportunities and decent salaries and so on.
I'm not sure for Europe, is because our internship for our 2-year program is required. It's a part of the curriculum. So students have to do an internship. With the 1 year in European, are there opportunities for students to do that? Because some of our students internships will turn into job offers. They don't have to re-recruit when they get back, and that's done because they do it during the summer. I'm kind of curious. This is educational for me, clearly.
Yeah. Totally.
Don't worry about the listeners. This is more, you know, I'm interested.
I'm talking straight to you, Danielle. No, so it's a really good question. When we were talking about some of the tendencies of like 1 year versus 2 year, typically, in, you know, Europe versus US, and class size and all these other things. Internships is another thing, because it is a 1 year program. There usually isn't. But the other thing is that it's also linked, the duration of the program is linked to the level of experience, right? Whereas in the US, like the kind of target or sweet spot age range is like maybe like 24 up to like 32. So you have like minimum 2 up to like 8 years experience. And it's kind of like 2 years higher in Europe. So they want like at least 3, some schools want 4 years experience up to like 9 or 10. And so people are like 26 minimum up to like 35. So there's a little bit of a shift in age. So because you have that additional experience, the program is shorter because like that, maybe that first year you're learning some of the more entry level stuff that these people have already learned in Europe. In terms of an internship, I think in Europe, I think it does have its place. It does have its purpose or its benefits, depending on where you are and what you're doing. Are you doing a major career pivot? Like, are you changing to a totally different function or sector? How old are you? It may or may not be appropriate for you, and it may or may not be appropriate in the country that you're studying, because as Krithika pointed out, Europe is not one country. So France, for example, has a lot of specific laws around internships, depending on how many hours you're interning, how long is the duration of the internship. Very often it's required that they're paid for the most part, whereas other countries not. So you really, you want to talk to the career services team, again, as part of your research, but during the program, as you navigate your MBA and you learn things along the way, and maybe have a change of heart, maybe you think, oh, maybe I should be doing that or that. Yeah. My experience where I was working, they offered for a lot of the students, like either a 2-week internship that was like very specific and in the industry they were looking at, or it could have been like in place of their consulting project. A lot of the European MBAs or one-year MBA programs conclude with a consulting project, which is usually about a month, maybe 6 weeks. And if they wanted to, in place of a consulting project, you could do an internship. So I think a lot of the schools really try to meet the students' needs as best as possible, because they're there for your success. Obviously, your success is their success. So yeah, so it really depends on the case. Again, like, how old are you? What industry, what country, and what kind of a change you're doing. What is your goal coming out of this MBA? Yeah.
I want to ask one thing. Is it a myth or is it a fact? Is it easier to get into the European programs because they don't seem to have too many requirements on the GMAT or the GPA?
I would definitely say it's a myth. I mean, I think that the US definitely is a little bit more centered around the GMAT as a data point for admission, and I think they're more concerned with like interviewing here. There's something about the culture where it's really important that you fit in. I'm thinking about office culture, right? Like, so like if you can't like hang and have a coffee around the cooler or like go to lunch for 2 hours and drink a glass of wine, not that you're against that specific act, but to integrate with the people. This is why I very often say like language skills are more important than what passport you hold. Because like, yes, you have to apply for a visa. And if a company really wants you, they will sponsor you for that visa. They'll find a way, like I did it. But if you can't speak the local language, you're going to have a hard time blending in. And there is that social aspect to work. I think that is a little bit more of a value here. So I think the interview counts more than the GMAT, to come back to your original point.
And in the US, since COVID and when things shut down in person and they launched online testing, we have test waiver options. And so we do truly look at it from holistic. Certain industries will have a heavier emphasis on test scores, like maybe in finance compared to tech. And so we do offer test waivers to candidates where they don't have to take a test to submit for admission, but we do look at it holistically, because I don't care if you have a 780 on the GMAT. If you can't talk to me, like to Eric's point, if my pen has more personality, that's a problem. So it's really important to have an understanding of who you are and what you want. But it goes back to like, what's the right fit?
Yeah, absolutely.
But if you have like a 300 GMAT and a great person, that's a hard balance. Like, that's something the committee is probably going to struggle over. So a 300 is a very low score for us.
They can call me if they're getting a 300.
I'm going to give them to you now and be like,
we'll get that up. Don't worry.
Do I get a referral fee? Just kidding.
Talk about it.
Okay, I'll get it.
Wheeling and dealing right on the MBA Waves. Love it. Danielle, I don't know if it's appropriate, but if you can, would you like to elaborate on like how it works with the admissions process? Not to focus too much on Kenena-Flagler, but like, because it's a relatively new thing, or new that it's become so widespread at a lot of schools. COVID was a factor, but the conversation of like, is testing relevant? Is it fair? And all that kind of stuff has been a topic for a while. And it's really been pushed into the forefront, where you have a lot of schools not just questioning it, but saying, hey, we're going to make it test optional. But in that case, is the student putting themselves at a disadvantage? How would you recommend somebody go about doing that, or maybe justifying not?
Yeah. I know candidates will email and they say, Miss Danielle, which is great because I don't want them to call me, Mrs. Richie, because I'm not married to my dad, but Miss Danielle, am I going to be at a disadvantage? Will I not be considered for scholarship if I don't submit my GMAT or GRE? The answer is you will be reviewed for it. We wouldn't put you at a disadvantage or set you up to fail. So regardless if you submit a test score or not, you're still going to be reviewed for admission as someone that might. We're just looking at it, are you quantitatively prepared because we want you to be set up for success in the classroom. And so if you're coming from, say, a communications journalism background, you don't have any quantitative experience, you might benefit immensely from taking the GMAT or GRE and be prepared for quantitative work in the program. So there are things that we're looking for in terms of, did they come from a STEM background? What type of work are they doing? So it's not just academically, maybe you had a soft skill undergrad degree, but in the work that you're doing, maybe you're a financial analyst and you're doing all these things and whatnot, and you're quantitatively prepared. So we're looking for all those different components when it comes to test waivers. The other thing, and specific to Kenena-Flagler, is we have business foundations. And this is something that's required for all of our students coming in. It is a virtual environment where you're doing financial accounting, business statistics, and finance. It's recorded by our faculty members, and it's preparing you for quant work that you will expect to experience in the core. So there are things in place. So again, even though you might be a wizard at it and we give you a test waiver, we still want to introduce that to you because maybe you've been removed from the classroom for 5 or 6 years. This helps you get back into that mindset as well. But students that get a test waiver are not at a disadvantage, but we do want to know what they want to do professionally post-MBA, because there are companies that will require a GMAT or a GRE still. And so regardless if we waive it or not, if they waive it, they still might have to take it for recruiting purposes. It's not, again, not for every industry, but those are things.
Yeah, investment banking, some like management consulting and so on. And let me just tell you how much fun it is to take a GMAT when you're wrapping up your MBA. So like if you're in one of those industries, definitely think about that.
Yeah, and this is a great opportunity. I mean, we just did an episode on test waivers. So if anyone who's watching has questions, it was in the past couple of weeks. So you can learn more about test waivers and if you should take advantage of that or not. I mean, you could get a test waiver, but if you're scoring so amazingly well on the test, you don't necessarily want to take that test waiver. You want to actually show up the best way that you can be. And Eric's right. Like when you're finishing up your degree, or even after you get your MBA, I don't think you're going to want to be studying for that GMAT, right? Like you want to take it when the taking's hot, right? So consider, even if you're given that opportunity, and if you're scoring great, then do it. And if you're not scoring amazingly well, understand why you're not scoring well, and then fine tune your efforts. It's a coachable test, and it's you might not need it for a program or for scholarships or a job, but if you do, like, it's better to do it when you're in the mode of studying and thinking about school.
Programs don't care or don't have a preference what exam you take, GMAT versus GRE. We have dual degree students that have taken like LSATs or MCATs, and they're able to produce the work that they're able to through those tests. And that's something that for our waiver process that we can evaluate. Maybe you took the executive assessment. We can take a look at that and consider you for a test waiver. So I would say, yes, the GMAT exam was built for business school admissions purposes, but it has grown tremendously in other ways where you can take the EA, you could take the GRE. I mean, don't take something that you're going to struggle with. You absolutely, as Barb put yourself in a good position and present your best self.
And the tests are fun. They're so much fun. They are. Growth mindset.
I'm going to refer myself to you.
Yeah, I mean, I always advise my clients, be in the mindset that you're going to take at least one test. Usually it's going to be GMAT or GRE. Danielle was speaking about like MCATs, LSATs, like maybe Series 7 or some of these other tests that I think it was mainly COVID that kind of brought that into the forefront as an alternative option. But now post-COVID, hopefully, right, these schools are still accepting those as an alternative. But the main pathway is going to be GMAT or GRE. And as Danielle said, nearly every top school accepts either one of those. I think you want to go into the application admissions journey, or the MBA admissions journey rather, with the idea that you're going to take the test at least twice. And I would definitely suggest doing like do like a trial test, do like a pre-test, right? Dry run, full exam, like to see which one you're comfortable with. Try both of them out to see which one seems to work better for you. And then work your butt off and get the highest score you can. And if at the end of the day, your test scores are like kind of average, you think it's not really going to help, but you have, say, good grades and you interview really well and you write great essays and your references are stellar, like all those other components, Danielle's speaking about like a holistic way or holistic approach to reviewing applications and admissions decisions. That's exactly it. Like if the GMAT or GRE score is not really doing anything for you and you're strong in everywhere else, that's the kind of case where I would advise my client, you know what, don't. And I recently did that. I told her not to submit her score. I said, I think she shouldn't because she's really strong in a lot of ways and that score was not helping. On the other hand, if your academics are not great, and we talked about this in a recent episode, I think with Linda, and your test score is like, above average or awesome, definitely submit it. So either way you want to do it so you can leverage it if it's a good score. Whereas if it's not a good score, you can like at a lot of schools.
It's about self-awareness too, and you bring up a good point, Eric, in that, how are your academics? If okay, I didn't score as I didn't perform well, but what can you change on your application? You can change your test score. You can take it as, twice. Yes. If you take it 20 times, we might have to have a conversation.
You can't take it 20 times.
Exactly. But it's a wake-up call, like
we like to exaggerate.
Yeah, I do. I mean, back in the day you could take it 20 times, but please don't ever do that. That's a lot of money.
It's a coachable test, and ultimately the way that I see it is that there's things on that test which demonstrate who you are as a business professional. And so even though it's sort of cloaked in verbal and quant tools, like you can tell if you're a risk taker, like maybe a too high of a risk taker. You can tell if you're articulate, standard American English meaning. So the test is it's not just a hoop. It is a hoop, but it does test your readiness for a business program in the same way that the MCAT tests your readiness for medical school, right? The verbal section on the MCAT is one of the hardest verbal sections because it actually simulates how a doctor will diagnose, prescribe, and understand the illness of the patient, but it's all cloaked in literature and understanding reading. It is not a bad training tool before you go to business school to understand these different concepts, even if it is 8th, 9th, 10th grade math, right? Because it is testing other things, and you really can fine tune your efforts without a lot of despair, let's say.
Yeah, I would say that, in addition to the test, like, I think another reason why some of my clients prefer Europe is it's like in and out. They love the duration of the program, especially like in Seattle, which is just 10 months and so on. So which is why I was thinking like, US also has these 1-year equivalents. For example, Kellogg has a 1-year program and other things. So Danielle, do you think like more and more US schools will tend to embrace the 1-year programs and offer like more variants of those?
Honestly, I don't. I know that some do. I worked for a school that did, but they ended up shutting that 1-year program down. because it wasn't gaining, it was more popular with the international candidates than it was the domestic candidates. I think that there's different formats, like the executive or the part-time or online. I see that growing, that market growing more so than the 1 year. Some schools will offer a master's in management, so a MIM, and they might do that. The school might decide to do that route instead of doing a 1 year full-time MBA. Because a lot of candidates are looking to make that pivot, whether functional area or industry or both. And the 2 year will give them that flexibility to do that and to be successful with that. So I truly, do not see the US going down that 1 year path. I think a small percentage, but I don't think the demand is there for us here.
Totally agree. When I was doing research for the book that Danielle actually collaborated with me on getting to be in the USA, I found that to be the case. Like, it's more about MIMs popping up in the US, Masters in Management programs. And hey, I don't blame them. Kind of the MIM is more like famous or been around longer in Europe, whereas the MBA in the US. And both sides kind of want to get on the game, right? So there's a little bit of that. But it's funny how candidates or students perceive program duration, because some people see like, oh, this program is only a year and it's that expensive, whereas others would see a shorter program as an advantage because you're back in the market, you're not unemployed, you're not paying 2 years of tuition, you're not like, you're back in the game quicker, like somebody's just said. So it's a perception, and it can vary quite a bit. But I think it really depends on like who you are, where you're at in your life, and what you're hoping to get out of the MBA. If you're looking for like a triple transformation, maybe a longer program is better for you because you have more time, learning the different, technical aspects of the job, the new job that you're going to have. If it's more a vertical move, maybe a 1 year is better for you. And then again, if you're like, starting to get into your mid-30s, 40s, you're probably looking at an executive MBA, which is a whole different ball of wax.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that the MS programs, the specialized masters, I would say they're popular, but I think that is really truly where that 1 year option comes from. Like if they want to be a subject matter expert in, say, supply chain, they may not want to do a 2 year MBA. And then that's a whole nother conversation. Do I do an MBA or do I do an MS degree? And we'll get that often too from candidates abroad. Like Eric and I mean, it's funny because we grew up 4 hours away from each other. We met in India and like we've traveled the world, and it was just funny because like they would be like, what's the difference? What, should I get my MBA, or what if I go get my master's first, then go get my MBA afterwards? Or what if I get a 1 year MBA, stay in Europe? Can I then go get an MBA in the US? So there's a lot of those different conversations that you want to have with yourself as well as with recruiters to make sure that you're getting the best ROI and that you're not spending a lot of time or money to reach your personal and professional goals. And so anytime you can talk to people like Eric or, me at a school, like those are the questions that you should be asking.
I think a lot of people, sometimes either there's just misinformation. Sometimes it's a lot of pressure from parents, especially in certain cultures, to go and quickly get an MBA. Some countries, and I'm thinking of India mainly, where very often people can do an MBA right after undergrad. And there isn't necessarily that clarity about how it is in other countries. So there's sort of like this rush. With other people I've met, you can tell there's a little bit of like a fear of going out there and the hustle and getting a job and so on. They're more like comfortable as a student, and I totally get that too. But timing is key. And like I said, there's a slight variation between Europe and North America in timing, but it's pretty much at least 2, 3, or 4 years professional experience. Average 27, 28 in the States, 29, 30 in Europe. And then at some point you kind of cap off, and that sweet spot or that range is, I think, very much driven by the corporate world. Right. Yeah. Like if you're finishing an MBA, you're supposed to come out being like a manager. And if you have like almost no work experience, like how are you going to manage people? And on the other hand, if you're, too experienced, they may think that you have, you're too qualified for the job, whatever that means, or that like you are going to expect too high of a salary than they're ready to pay. And so there's a range that is kind of set by by the corporate world. If you're an entrepreneur, on the other hand, you may find that you can break several of the rules, meaning that the admissions criteria might be a bit more flexible if you are clear that you are not looking for a job post MBA, and that you have like a decent network or some cash to start your business. So demonstrating other aspects of, demonstrating your career plan or path to the admissions committee could be important if you have a little bit more of a unique pathway, like starting a company, or you already have started a company and you're doing the MBA to like maybe have like some hard lessons and the things that you just figured out along the way and you want to really tighten it up, or you're helping run a family business.
In the US, you can't just start your own company upon completion of your MBA, because you can't, like, you have to have to be sponsored by a company. So that might be a difference too between the US and Europe, is that if you're coming in as an entrepreneur, perfect. But what is your post-MBA goal? If that's just to continue to be
You're talking about international students, Danielle? Sorry to interrupt you. Yeah, for sure. There's going to be a visa question. So please go on. For international students, please.
Yeah, for international students studying in the US, that could be a roadblock for you if you're looking just to continue with your business afterwards. But if you're looking to return back to your home country and go into your family business, then that is okay.
Totally.
Yeah, but the one thing too, Eric, quick question on is, some candidates internationally specifically might have a 3-year degree in their home country. And so in the US, we have to make sure that it's equivalent to a US degree. So we'll see candidates maybe get an MBA or a MIM to add on that 1 year to be a 4th. But I didn't know if that was the same for Europe.
Yeah, again, it's going to depend on the countries. I mean, you do have the Bologna Accord. So like,
wait, Europe is not a country?
I did hear that somewhere. No, Bologna Accord, as in Bologna, Italy, where they have kind of sort of tried their best to unify a lot of things in terms of how credits are calculated for classes and how many need to graduate and all that kind of stuff. Because Europe is a hodgepodge of all these different countries that used to be kingdoms, and they have their own traditions and so on. So it is going to vary for sure. But like, as I mentioned, France, which I obviously know the best, they have specific rules and very strict rules regarding internships. And that is really to protect people, to make sure people aren't taken advantage of. They do have strict rules about the other things too. So it's going to depend really from country to country.
That's our subtitle. That's the subtitle of MBA Waves. MBA Waves. It depends. Yes.
Totally. No, what I was going to say about as far as entrepreneurs, like putting it in the context of international students. So again, it's not just non-French people. If they are from the European Union, they can be here. So sorry, British people. But if they're from another European Union country or Schengen zone country, which includes, it's not exactly the same. There's overlap in a lot of the case, but not always. Like the UK was European Union, but never Schengen zone, and so on. Switzerland also Schengen zone, but not the European Union, the reverse. And so you have to know like what your visa status is. But if you're not from one of those countries, as long as one of your partners on the project, on the entrepreneurial project, is a French resident, then you can. So there's like this loophole. And yeah, to be fair, like France has put a lot of things in place to try to provide extra support for entrepreneurs and things to attract like some bright ideas, bright minds and great ideas, like helping them to get a visa, fast tracking that, like housing, mentorship, investment, seed money, and so on. Not to say that everyone's just getting handed some bars of gold with a croissant, but like they do get a lot of support if you can prove that you have a good business plan and something solid. So that's interesting. It's a very country by country basis. And if that is the case for you, if you are an up and coming entrepreneur, that's something you really want to get into detail with, not only the recruiter, like Danielle, for example, or somebody from the career services, or perhaps there's an incubator on campus that you want to like investigate and see what kind of services they provide. Oh, wow. We have almost gone to an hour. I know we got to cut it off soon. So any final points, Danielle, or anyone wants to make before we wrap it up today?
I say, we've talked about it a lot. One, it depends, but two, it's just finding the right fit for you, whether, where you pursue your MBA, there will be a fit. It's just like finding a pair of shoes, you got to try on a few, you got to look at a few before you find the right price point. And also what your ultimate goal is.
Prince Charming.
Yeah, Prince Charming.
That's what you were going to say.
No, but yeah, definitely take the time and find the right fit. Because then that will be your ultimate happiness.
And if one shoe doesn't fit, don't buy the whole pair. Right.
Just go one. Yeah. Where to study abroad and, study in one location, study abroad for the second.
There you go.
And I would say definitely take advantage of all these study abroad programs. There are so many. And in fact, that's what people do. Like they have their first choice and second choice. And if they're not able to go to either one of them, or they have to pick between the two, they choose these exchange programs. So that's another great way to experience, as you said, Danielle, the best of both worlds and not feel left out.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Guys, I want to thank you for joining us today. Danielle, especially a special guest on our show, MBA Waves. And for those of you who asked questions or made comments, thank you so much. It really contributed to the conversation. We didn't get to post all of them on the screen, but we definitely influenced the flow of the conversation. So thank you so much. Especially,
and they're on LinkedIn. They're on LinkedIn, so you can see those quotes and also respond to them. We can keep the dialogue going.
100%. I was going to especially shout out Dr. Marlena Corcoran and Pharrell Dion for your comments. And finally, don't forget to join us next week at the same time, same place, MBAwaves.com. See you next Tuesday.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.